I give the floor to the representative of Russia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I should like to extend our gratitude to all of those delegations who have voiced their condolences in connection with the tragedy which occurred yesterday in the skies over Syria. We thank Mr. de Mistura and Mr. Lowcock for their briefings. Yesterday in Sochi, yet another historic milestone occurred vis-à-vis developments of the situation in Syria, namely the Russo-Turkish summit, following which a memorandum was signed to stabilize the situation in the Idlib de-escalation zone. Alongside our Turkish partners, we will submit this document for its circulation as an official Security Council document. Key components of the memorandum include maintenance of the de-escalation zone and establishment within it of demilitarized zones, which will help to conduct focused work to ensure a sustained cessation of hostilities. At the same time, what is reaffirmed is the decisiveness to continue to combat terrorism in Syria in all of its forms and manifestations. Relentless and uncompromising consistent struggle against terrorism remains among the chief obligations of all United Nations member states. This document is a confirmation of the fact that Russia, alongside other Astana guarantors, has and continues to undertake tremendous efforts to see to it that the situation around Idlib will be resolved through negotiations and that civilians will not suffer. As we describe to our partners and have been describing all of this time. Work to seek an optimal solution will continue, regardless of what some may state due to envy or merely impotence. The Astana format remains a functional and effective mechanism. We thank our Kazakh colleagues for their contribution. On the whole, our view is that the situation on the ground has set the stage for a meaningful political process. This, too, is largely to the credit of the Astana 3, we will persevere in our efforts to facilitate the establishment of a constitutional committee comprised of representatives of the Syrian authorities, opposition forces, and civil society. The challenge and objective is to ensure the beginning of its work as soon as possible. We call for attempts at destructive intervention in this sensitive process to be abandoned, for there to be an abandonment of attempts to impose contrived, ill-conceived configurations. They only slow down the formulation of balanced resolutions and undermine achievement of a sustained, lasting settlement. I wish to tell Stefan it is not worth, perhaps, using the Security Council to exert pressure on the guarantors. They are doing more for the political process than anybody present in this chamber. It is important for you to facilitate, not to lead the process. The Syrian decisions need to be owned by the Syrian people themselves, as is stipulated under Resolution 2254, to which we all, including yourself, frequently refer. All of those who do not intend to advance scenarios in a way that runs counter to the genuine desires of the Syrian people, who do not intend to embroil themselves in political engineering, we call upon them to help, or at least not to obstruct the activities of the guarantor countries of the Astana process to launch what is necessary for Syria and the Middle East and the entire international community, namely a comprehensive political process. This should proceed from the outcomes of the Syrian National Dialogue Congress in Sochi and Security Council resolutions on Syria. Mr. President, our approaches to tackling humanitarian issues in Syria remain unchanged. We believe that it is unseemly, to put it mildly, to selectively approach the delivery of assistance to Syrian people. It is not acceptable to blatantly politicize issues pertaining to the delivery of humanitarian assistance, the rebuilding of what was destroyed by terrorists, upholding the inalienable rights of refugees and IDPs to return to their homes. Unfortunately, unbalanced policies in Syrian affairs emerge more often than not. To specify, having familiarized ourselves with the Secretary General's report on the humanitarian situation in Syria, we were unable to find anything there about issues pertaining to access for humanitarian personnel to a number of regions not under Damascus's control, including those occupied by the coalition in breach of Syria's sovereignty. There is no mention of what took place and what continues to take place in Raqqa. Yet it is known that the bodies of the dead are still being retrieved from under the rubble after the so-called coalition razed the city to the ground, having liberated it from terrorists and while they were at it from civilians. I would not recall a call for a return of refugees at that time being issued. Apparently, some have a selective approach to humanism. There has been no progress in delivery of vital supplies for the residents of Rukban camp, which is located in an enclosed zone around the U.S. at Tanf military base. Today, indeed, Mark, in his briefing, mentioned both Raqqa and Rukban. Once again, we would draw attention to the fact that the value of the conduct of cross-border operations in the light of developments on the ground has been exaggerated. This is a mechanism that has been introduced as an extraordinary measure. It is not transparent and blatantly undermines Syria's sovereignty. It is important to move towards its eventual drawdown. It is important to promptly rebuild the Syrian economy, and especially areas most severely damaged by the hostilities. Here, double standards need to be eschewed. Political conditions need to be advanced. Many such approaches are being rejected, and this was confirmed during last week's 60th Annual International Fair in Damascus with the participation of official representatives and companies from 48 states. It is past time to acknowledge the fact that unilateral sanctions imposed by a number of states undermine not the regime, as you call it, but above all are detrimental to ordinary Syrian civilians. This is a nefarious, counterproductive practice, not only just in the Syrian, but in other contexts as well. Sir, the Russian Federation will continue to deliver assistance to Syria, both politically and on the humanitarian front. With the assistance of the Russian Center for the Reception, Distribution, and Resettlement of Refugees, Syrians continue to return from Lebanon and Jordan. Since 18 July, overall from Syria, 13,500 refugees have returned, and since 30 September 2015, 243,000 people have returned. Furthermore, those returning to their homes are also internally displaced people. As of since 1 January, 149,000 IDPs returned to their homes, and since 30 September 2015, 1.2 million people returned to their homes. Furthermore, the Syrian authorities are conducting socioeconomic measures which are geared towards generating momentum for rebuilding key infrastructure. And they continue to deliver a comprehensive humanitarian assistance to civilians. Since September 2015, some 30,000 homes were rebuilt and renovated, including more than 5,000 educational and 150 medical institutions. For our part, during this period, Russia organized and conducted 1,935 humanitarian operations, during which there was provision and distribution of over 3,000 tons of food and basic necessities. Russian military and medical personnel delivered assistance to some 93,000 Syrians. Mr. President, despite overriding trends towards greater stabilization, the situation in Syria on the whole remains fraught. Fighters continue to intensely shell Syrian army positions and residential areas on government-controlled territory from the de-escalation zone. In August, there were 554 violations of the cessation of hostilities regime by illegal armed groups with the use of mortars, anti-aircraft, and heavy machine guns, as a result of which 29 people were killed and 71 were wounded. As a result of terrorist bombardment, civilians continue to perish. On 7 September, when terrorists used multiple rocket launchers in Mahard, 9 civilians died, including 5 women and 3 children. 30 people were wounded. On 13 September, when terrorists used improvised explosive launchers in Aleppo, a child died and 13 were wounded. At the same time, fighters continue to use weaponized drones to target Russian Khmeimim airbase. Since July, Russian air defenses destroyed 58 such drones. Furthermore, within the Idlib de-escalation zone, training is ongoing for fighters and white helmet activists to stage an episode of chemical weapons use. There is information that this fabrication was already filmed in Jisr al-Shugur and Han Shehun. Moreover, those forced to participate in such initiatives included Syrians, including children, abducted from Idlib. Moreover, there is information that Nusra recently provided barrels of chlorine to Jaish al-Islam. Once again, we draw attention to this fact. We repeatedly issued warnings about this. The activity of the fighters is being fueled from abroad and is also being entrenched in the light of blatant disregard by some of those who advocate a credible peace process, the Syrian sovereignty, where Damascus has a legitimate right to protect through the means available to it. Aiding and abetting extremists, even indirectly, is not acceptable. We would note that acknowledgement of the erroneousness of relying on extremists is finally dawning on those who played into the Syrian crisis. Some states have initiated relevant proceedings to shed light on the role of certain states in support of groups who have tainted themselves by cooperating with terrorists and in breach of international humanitarian law. Our hope is that these proceedings will be carried through to their logical conclusion. Sir, we heard concerns today that the Syrian conflict is liable to lead to more serious regional consequences. This is also a concern to us, and we see that some of our partners are exploiting Syria as a springboard to unleash a more dangerous conflict with far-reaching, unpredictable consequences. In this connection, once again, we would like to call for genuinely collective work on all conflicts in the region, especially along counterterrorism lines, and to abandon attempts to resolve issues through Syria in that way. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russia for his statement.